The letter showed up on a Tuesday afternoon, folded like it was delivering somebody's funeral arrangements. Thick white envelope. HOA seals stamped across the front like they were the federal government or something. I remember standing there in my driveway holding a cordless drill in one hand, coffee in the other, looking at this stupid envelope while my brand new cedar fence caught the evening sunlight like something out of a home improvement commercial. 6 panels, clean lines, dark stain, perfectly level. I built that thing myself over 2 weekends. Every post measured twice. Every permit filed properly through the county office, because I'm not one of those guys who cuts corners and then acts shocked when things go sideways later. Cost me $2,300 all in, and honestly, after the year I'd had, that fence felt less like landscaping and more like finally planting roots somewhere. Then I opened the letter. Notice of property violation. Real friendly opening. According to the HOA board, my fence had encroached onto protected community land and needed to be removed by Friday, or I'd face a daily enforcement penalty of $150. Friday. 3 days. No phone call, no conversation, just straight to financial threats like I'd committed some kind of suburban war crime. I actually laughed at first because it sounded ridiculous. I had the survey map. I had the permit approval. Hell, I still had the county inspector's signature sitting in my kitchen drawer. So I figured this was just a misunderstanding, one annoying conversation, maybe some bored retiree on the HOA board trying to feel important before pickleball practice. I was wrong. The hearing happened Thursday night inside this depressing little clubhouse room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet glue. For board members sitting behind a folding table like they were a low-budget courtroom panel, and right in the center was this guy named Randall Pierce. HOA president, mid-60s, silver hair, polo shirt tucked into jeans, so tight, it looked medically dangerous. Randall had this way of talking where he smiled while threatening you, which somehow made it worse. I laid everything out in front of him, county plat map, permit paperwork, deed description, photographs from the install, the whole stack. The man barely glanced down. He just slid the papers back across the table with 2 fingers and said, "County documents don't override association records, Mr. Carter." Real calm, real smug, like he'd said that line 100 times before. I remember blinking at him for a second because, what does that even mean? Association records don't magically rewrite property boundaries. But Randall kept going, talking over me now, saying the property manager had already confirmed the violation and the board considered the matter closed unless I voluntarily removed the structure by Friday at 5 p.m. Then came the part that really got under my skin. Before I even stood up to leave, they added a $300 administrative enforcement fee to my homeowner account. Just like that. No vote. No discussion. Like they were charging me for the inconvenience of defending myself. And here's the thing people don't understand about HOA power trips. It's rarely about the fence or the mailbox or the grass height. It's about submission. They want to see if you fold. Randall leaned back in his chair with this tiny little grin and said, "Most residents prefer to cooperate before this escalates." That word stuck with me all night. Cooperate. Like I was being interrogated instead of discussing a property line. I drove home angry, but not loud angry. The dangerous kind, the quiet kind where your brain suddenly gets very focused. Because what Randall and the rest of that board didn't know, what absolutely nobody in that room knew, was that before I moved into that neighborhood, I spent almost a decade working as a licensed land surveyor for a county engineering office in northern Arizona. Boundary disputes, easement conflicts, title corrections, that used to be my entire career. And unlike most homeowners they bullied, I knew exactly where to start digging. By midnight, I had old subdivision plats spread across my dining room table, county GIS overlays pulled up on my laptop, property deeds stacked beside a yellow legal pad full of measurements and notes. That's when I saw something strange. Not my fence, theirs. Right there near the subdivision entrance, hidden in plain sight for over 30 years, was a decorative brick wall the HOA had probably bragged about in every welcome packet since the Reagan administration. And according to the original recorded plat map, that wall wasn't where it was supposed to be. Not even close. Now let me pause the story for a second because this is the part most people completely misunderstand about HOAs. And honestly, it's why boards like Randall's get away with this stuff for years. People assume the HOA has more authority than the county, which sounds believable if you've never dealt with property law before. But according to standard procedure, an HOA cannot simply invent land boundaries because they printed something in a community handbook back in 1998. Their rules can regulate appearance, maintenance, shared spaces, sure, but they do not override recorded deeds, filed plats, or county survey records. That's not how real property law works. And from a legal perspective, the second an HOA starts enforcing penalties based on incorrect boundary assumptions, they step into dangerous territory, because now you're talking about wrongful enforcement, title disputes, possible negligence, sometimes even selective harassment if they're targeting certain homeowners more aggressively than others. But here's the psychological part nobody talks about. This is a psychological trap HOA boards fall into all the time, especially the older power-heavy ones. They spend years dealing with residents who panic the moment they receive an official-looking letter. So eventually they stop verifying facts altogether because intimidation becomes the system. Most homeowners don't challenge them. Most people see legal language, fines, deadlines, and they surrender immediately because conflict feels expensive and exhausting. Randall was counting on that. The little smile, the rushed deadline, the instant $300 fee, that wasn't random. That was pressure strategy. Create urgency, project authority, make the target feel isolated before they have time to investigate. The lesson here is, bureaucracy sounds powerful until somebody who actually understands the paperwork starts reading it carefully. And unfortunately for Randall, paperwork was kind of my thing. The next morning I called in sick to work for the first time in almost 8 months, made a pot of terrible coffee, and turned my garage into a temporary survey office. My old equipment cases were still stacked on a metal shelf near the water heater, dusty from years of not being touched, and opening them felt weirdly familiar, like talking to an old version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. Tripod, transit level, GPS receiver, boundary pins, stuff most people would walk past without a second glance. But to me, every piece carried muscle memory. By noon I was standing near the subdivision entrance wearing work boots and holding a survey rod while people drove by pretending not to stare. And that brick wall. Man, once I started really looking at it, the problem became impossible to ignore. The HOA had built this fancy curved entrance feature back in the late 80s. Red brick, decorative iron lanterns, flower beds, the whole suburban kingdom package. Looked impressive if you didn't know what you were seeing. But the recorded plat told a different story. According to the original subdivision filing, the developer had reserved a very specific easement boundary separating community signage from individually deeded homeowner parcels. Somewhere over the years, either through sloppy construction or pure arrogance, the wall had drifted 14 inches beyond that boundary line and onto privately owned property. 14 inches doesn't sound dramatic until you realize property law treats inches the same way banks treat missing zeros. Tiny difference, massive consequences. I spent 2 straight days verifying everything because if I was going to come after an HOA board, I needed absolute certainty. No guesses, no emotional accusations, just math, records, and evidence. I pulled archived county imagery going back decades, overlaid GIS parcel data, cross-checked deed descriptions against monument markers buried along the subdivision corners. Every path led to the same conclusion. Randall's precious entrance wall was encroaching on a homeowner land, and it had been doing it for over 30 years. The funniest part? The affected parcel belonged to a retired widow named Elaine Porter, who probably had no clue she technically owned part of the HOA's decorative landscaping. I knocked on her door that Friday afternoon, carrying copies of the plats. Sweet woman, probably late 70s, invited me inside before I even finished introducing myself. The moment I explained what I'd found, she just stared at the papers and said, "Honey, they fined me $200 last year because my bird feeder was the wrong color." I almost laughed. Almost. Because suddenly the whole thing made sense. This board had spent years policing curtains, flower pots, mailbox paint, all while their own landmark structure sat illegally across a property boundary they never bothered to verify. Elaine gave me written permission to document the encroachment formally, and that changed everything. Now this wasn't just me defending a fence anymore. Now I had standing. Real standing. That weekend, I drafted a full encroachment report the same way I used to prepare county submissions years ago. Professional diagrams, GPS coordinates, plat references, deed citations, photographic evidence. The works. 53 pages total. Monday morning, I mailed certified copies to 3 places: the County Land Records Office, the HOA's registered legal counsel, and the property management company that had signed my violation notice. Then I waited. That's the part movies always skip, by the way. The waiting. Because once legal paperwork enters the system, everything slows down into this cold bureaucratic crawl where nobody says much, but everybody suddenly starts getting nervous behind closed doors. About 2 weeks later, I noticed something interesting. Randall stopped making eye contact with me around the neighborhood. Before, he'd walk around acting like the mayor of suburban America, chest out, smiling at people like he owned the sidewalks. Now, different story. Guy looked like he was trying to avoid sniper fire every time he saw me checking my mail. Then the survey trucks showed up. 3 county vehicles parked near the subdivision entrance at 8 a.m. sharp. Workers unloading tripods and measuring equipment, while half the neighborhood peeked through blinds pretending they weren't absolutely dying for gossip. I'll never forget the look on Randall's face when he arrived. Pure panic hidden under fake confidence. He walked over to one of the county surveyors, talking fast with his hands moving everywhere, and even from across the street, I could tell he was trying to control the conversation. Didn't work. County crews don't care about HOA politics. They care about records, measurements, coordinates, facts. And facts were not on Randall's side anymore. By the end of the week, the county opened a formal title discrepancy review tied to the subdivision entrance parcel. That phrase right there, title discrepancy review, is basically legal gasoline. Once those words enter official records, attorneys start billing by the hour. The HOA's law firm responded fast after that. Too fast. Suddenly, the same people who threatened me with daily fines wanted constructive dialogue. Funny how that works. I got an email requesting an informal meeting with the board to seek collaborative resolution opportunities. Translation? Oh crap, this homeowner knows what he's doing. I showed up anyway because honestly, by that point I wanted to look Randall in the eye. The energy inside that clubhouse had completely changed. Gone was the smug confidence. Gone was the little grin. Randall looked exhausted, tie crooked, dark circles under his eyes like he'd spent the week Googling phrases such as quiet title litigation and personal liability exposure. Their attorney was there too, younger guy, expensive suit, very careful with his words. He started talking almost immediately. Mr. Carter, after reviewing the materials you submitted, the board is prepared to reconsider the enforcement action involving your fence. Reconsider. Such a polite little word for, we stepped on a landmine. They offered to remove the violation notice entirely, refund the $300 administrative fee, and issue a written acknowledgement confirming my fence complied with all applicable property boundaries. But here's where it got really interesting. The attorney also mentioned the board intended to evaluate remediation options regarding the entrance wall encroachment. Evaluate remediation options. Again, lawyer language. Translation? They were terrified. Because if Elaine decided to pursue legal action, things could get ugly fast. According to preliminary estimates, relocating the wall and resolving the title issue could cost the HOA somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000 once engineering fees, demolition, reconstruction, and legal expenses piled up. And guess who ultimately pays HOA legal bills? Everybody. The homeowners. Which meant Randall's little power trip was now threatening the entire neighborhood financially. I asked the attorney one question. Did anybody on the board ever verify the original plat before issuing violations against my fence? Silence. Randall looked down at the table. Nobody answered. That silence told me everything. They never checked. Not once. For years they'd operated on assumption, intimidation, and momentum because nobody had ever forced them to slow down and prove anything. The official board meeting happened 3 nights later, and for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, the clubhouse was packed. People who never attended HOA meetings suddenly became deeply interested in local governance when rumors of lawsuits and illegal walls started circulating. Funny how that happens too. Randall read the motion in this stiff robotic voice while avoiding eye contact with basically everyone in the room. The board hereby rescinds the violation issued to Lot 14 concerning the cedar perimeter fence and authorizes reimbursement of all associated enforcement fees. Hearing that out loud felt strangely anticlimactic after everything that happened. No dramatic applause. No movie soundtrack. just paperwork correcting other paperwork. But then came the second motion, the one that made the room go completely silent. The board further acknowledges an unresolved boundary discrepancy involving the subdivision entrance structure currently under legal review. You could actually hear people whispering after that. One woman near the back muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Another guy just started laughing under his breath. Randall looked like a man actively regretting every life decision that led him to that folding table. After the meeting ended, neighbors kept stopping me in the parking lot asking questions. Some were supportive, some just wanted gossip. One older man shook my hand and said, "About time somebody pushed back." And honestly, that stuck with me more than the refund did. Because this was never just about wood panels or property lines. It was about what happens when small pockets of unchecked authority convince themselves they no longer need accountability. My fence is still standing today exactly where it was the day I built it. Straight, legal, fully permitted. The HOA entrance wall, though, last I heard, engineers were still discussing reconstruction options because once boundary issues become official county matters, they don't disappear quietly. Every now and then I still drive past those survey markers near the entrance and smile a little to myself because the irony is almost too perfect. They tried to force me to tear down my fence by Friday, and instead, they ended up measuring their own wall for months. Looking back now, the weirdest part isn't the legal fight or the surveys or even Randall acting like the king of suburban compliance for half the neighborhood. It's how quickly ordinary people surrender the moment paperwork sounds official enough. That's really what this whole story exposed for me. Most systems, HOAs, management companies, even local bureaucracies, depend heavily on one assumption, that nobody's going to challenge them because challenging authority feels exhausting. And honestly, most of the time, they're right. People have jobs, kids, bills, stress, aging parents. They don't have the energy to spend nights reading plat maps and county records just because somebody in a polo shirt decided their fence looked questionable. That's why intimidation works so often. Not because the authority is always correct, but because confidence can look a lot like correctness when nobody pushes back. According to standard procedure, property disputes are supposed to rely on documentation, recorded boundaries, verified measurements, things grounded in actual evidence. But somewhere along the way, a lot of HOA boards stop operating like administrators and start acting like rulers. And from a legal perspective, that becomes dangerous fast because unchecked enforcement creates blind spots. The board spent years obsessing over trash cans, lawn edges, paint shades, tiny harmless stuff. Meanwhile, their own landmark structure was sitting 14 inches over a legal boundary the entire time. Nobody checked because nobody expected to be questioned. This is a psychological trap organizations fall into constantly. The longer people go unchallenged, the more they confuse routine authority with infallibility. Randall probably never woke up planning to become the neighborhood villain. I honestly believe that. But power mixed with ego creates this slow drift where rules stop being about fairness and start becoming personal. The lesson here is, confidence should never replace verification, especially when money, property, or legal threats get involved. And for homeowners specifically, keep records, save permits, learn your property lines. Read the documents nobody else bothers reading because one boring PDF can completely change the balance of power in a dispute. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to scream at meetings or become the neighborhood rebel. Sometimes the strongest move is just calmly understanding the system better than the people weaponizing it. That's what scared Randall in the end. Not anger, not confrontation, competence. And honestly, I think that's why this story connected with so many people in the neighborhood after everything happened. Deep down, everybody knows what it feels like to be pressured by a system that assumes you'll comply before you investigate. Maybe for you it's an HOA. Maybe it's insurance paperwork, city permits, landlord disputes, workplace policies, different setting, same psychology. Somebody counting on exhaustion to win. So now I'm curious. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or some bureaucratic mess that tried to push you around until you started asking questions? Because if there's one thing this whole situation taught me, it's that the moment somebody says, "Don't worry about the details," that's usually the exact moment you should start reading them very carefully.